Hat, check. Sunglasses, check. Notes, check. Pepsi, check. Sources, check. Thick skin, check. Oh, and one more thing. 10,000 subscribers, check. Let's go! First things first, guys, we did it. We hit 10,000 subscribers, and we did it a lot sooner than what we were anticipating. So I appreciate everybody hitting the like and subscribe button. There would be no Golden Blue Dude without you guys, so I'm super excited about that. We're going to have a celebration show on Sunday. I'm thinking around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We haven't nailed it down yet, but we will by the end of the day. It had been over a decade since any type of conference realignment news has been mentioned. And then in 2021, we heard that Oklahoma and Texas were headed to the SEC. And then this year, the bigger bombshell, in my opinion, was UCLA and USC going to the Big Ten. Now, once Texas and Oklahoma announced that they were going to the SEC, I started pumping out conference realignment videos, a lot of them. So I tried to cover every scenario that I could think of. And one of those scenarios was USC and UCLA to the Big Ten, because I knew that the Big Ten was going to want some of the bigger brands from the Pac-12. Those were the two biggest brands. Of course, I threw in there Oregon and Washington, which is still a possibility. But now I want to talk about the mistakes that have been made in conference realignment. Hindsight is always 20/20, and it's kind of fun to look back and say, man, why did they choose to go to that conference? Or why did that conference choose that team and not that team? So we're going to go and look back at all the conference realignment that was not good. The bad moves of conference realignment, okay? So the first thing is the ACC. You already knew I was going to talk about it. The ACC accepting Boston College, Syracuse, and Pitt over West Virginia. Yes, and I understand that they were thinking, hey, we're grabbing the Boston market. We're grabbing a big Syracuse fan base. We're grabbing a nice Pittsburgh fan base. But the problem is those fans don't care about their teams. I mean, look at the football stadiums. Pitt can't fill up their stadium, and the excuse is they have an NFL stadium. They share an NFL stadium. I understand that. That should have went into your decision. They share an NFL stadium, and they can't fill it up. That's less money for you. Same with Boston College. They don't even have an NFL stadium that they share. They have their own stadium, and it's not even that big. I think it's like 45,000, something like that, and they can't fill it up. People in Boston don't care about Boston College. They watch the Patriots, the Celtics, and the Bruins. That's it. In fact, they might be interested more in the New York pro football teams more than Boston College. That's how low the fan support is. And Boston College actually used to have a lot of fan support back in the day. I remember whenever they were in the Big East, it was a tough place to play. So maybe at the time of the decision, their brand was still decent, the fans still cared. But right now, their brand sucks, and the fans don't care. Now with Pitt, the fans really never did care, so I don't understand the Pitt decision, other than whenever they played West Virginia in the Backyard Brawl, Penn State, that's a great rivalry, even Notre Dame, that was a great rivalry, and some of the bigger brands. But going into the ACC, there's not a big draw for Pitt fans. They do not fill that stadium. Now with Syracuse, they're labeled as the largest fan base, not counting Notre Dame in the ACC. Problem is, they do not support their team. I mean, the Carrier Dome holds like 55,000, and it's rarely filled. But the crazy thing is, it was filled consistently in the Big East. I remember as a West Virginia fan, even when Syracuse was bad and West Virginia was good, I hated it when West Virginia had to go up to the Carrier Dome because it was very, very tough to beat Syracuse. You look at West Virginia, they filled their stadium on a consistent basis, especially when West Virginia is good. Even when they're bad, their attendance is better than the attendance of Pitt, Boston College, and Syracuse when they're good. So overall, it just made more sense to take West Virginia over any of those three teams. And the biggest thing that's thrown out there is academics. Well, the thing that you have to take into consideration when you're looking at West Virginia academics is they do not have any affiliated schools that they can throw those lower academics down to. The next bad decision that happened in conference realignment, staying in the ACC, except it's the other way around. Virginia Tech and Miami moving to the ACC. Now, at the time, it looked like a good move. The Big East was going down. But I think Miami and Virginia Tech could have waited it out a little bit longer with West Virginia, because West Virginia stayed longer. They would have continued dominating the Big East, keep building their brand, making money, and I think the SEC would have come a calling sooner rather than later. That could have been a big mistake by Virginia Tech and Miami. I mean, maybe eventually they end up in the Big Ten or the SEC, but they could have made it sooner rather than later, and they have not had a lot of success in the ACC. A lot of people thought that they would come in the ACC and dominate. That did not happen. I do think that was a mistake by Virginia Tech and Miami. The next mistake that I go back and look at is Louisville not going to the Big 12 with West Virginia. Louisville decided to go to the ACC, and the ACC was interested in Louisville, not West Virginia. But now looking at the grant of rights situation and the possibility of the ACC getting picked apart, maybe Louisville should have waited out with West Virginia and joined the Big 12. I mean, that would have kept that rivalry intact. I think Louisville would have had decent success in the Big 12. I mean, they've had a couple good years in the ACC, but overall, not all that great. I think Louisville would be making more money in the Big 12. So overall, looking back on that decision, I think it would have been better for Louisville to wait and go to the Big 12 with West Virginia instead of jumping on the ACC when they offered. Now we're going to move on to a different conference, the Big 10. I think it was a big mistake for the Big 10 adding Rutgers and Maryland. And I know what you're going to say. By adding Rutgers and Maryland, they gained DC, Maryland, and New York markets. But who really watches Rutgers and Maryland in those TV markets? And I understand that they make more money per TV set, so they don't necessarily have to have more people watching to make more money. But still, there is not a lot of people that watch Rutgers and Maryland. I just don't think they're a good fit in the Big 10. To me, they still look like outsiders in the Big 10, just not a good fit. Staying in the Big 10, I think it was a big mistake for Nebraska to move to the Big 10. Nebraska should have stayed in the Big 12. Nebraska thought that they were going to have a lot of success in the Big 10, and it just hasn't happened. In fact, the opposite. They have trended downward, especially under Scott Frost. Maybe that's more about Scott Frost, not the Big 10. But even before Scott Frost, they had a little bit of success, but nothing compared to what they had in the Big 12. And I have talked to Nebraska fans. They missed the Big 12. They missed the rivalries. The one big reason why Nebraska left the Big 12 was because of Texas. Now that Texas is gone, if they weren't making the money that they're making in the Big 10, they would most definitely think about going back to the Big 12. Staying in the Big 12, I think it was a big mistake for Colorado to move to the Pac-12. Same reason as Nebraska, it was because of Texas, but Colorado has done absolutely nothing in the Pac-12. This was a terrible, terrible mistake by Colorado. I mean, not only have they not been competitive, but they're not making as much money. This was just an overall bad decision by Colorado, and it's just because of their hate of Texas. You can't let your emotions guide your thoughts and your decisions, and that's exactly what Colorado did. And that's why they're hesitant on going back to the Big 12, because they would have to swallow their pride. Even though Texas is leaving, that would be Colorado admitting that they made a mistake jumping from the Big 12 to the Pac-12 and then jumping back to the Big 12. But the original decision to go to the Pac-12, big mistake, Colorado. Speaking of the Pac-12, I think the Pac-12's biggest blunder was not accepting BYU. And they gave all the reasons, and I understand the reasons. But I'm telling you, if the Pac-12 would have accepted BYU, I don't think that they would be in quite the position than what they are right now. Even if USC and UCLA still leave to the Big 10, if you put BYU in the Pac-12 and not the Big 12, number one, you're hurting the Big 12 and you're helping the Pac-12. This was a big mistake by the Pac-12, and it was because of their arrogance. And we're the highest of learning institutions. Well, guess what? Two of your highest learning institutions are now headed to the Big 10, and your conference is in danger of going extinct. If you would have brought in BYU, I don't think we would be talking about the Pac-12 going extinct right now. I think you would have enough clout with BYU and still having Oregon and Washington to where you could attract some teams from the Big 12. Instead, it's the other way around. Big mistake, Pac-12. Y'all let me know in the comments section, are there any mistakes that I missed, and which one of these mistakes do you disagree with me the most? That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.